everybody, hope you guys are doing great today. So we're going to be jumping into our first real content piece today, and that is, what is logic? So most of us use the term, have heard of the term logic at least sometime in our lives. Some of us use it frequently, but generally, we oftentimes will use it pretty informally, right? Or pretty casually or colloquially. We might just say something is logical because it makes sense, or because it's intuitive, or because it's obvious, or because we want to say, you're silly for not seeing it. But actually, what's logical is oftentimes counterintuitive. And it's going to be hard to see, and it's going to be hard to get into what's actually going on, logically speaking. So instead of thinking about logic in terms of like saying, well, he went to the Broncos game because he's a Broncos fan, and that's logical, right? That's just kind of like a common sense idea. That's just, well, yeah, these things make sense together. And that's not really what we mean by logic. By logic, we're specifically concerned with what we call inferences. And more specifically, with trying to figure out what are good inferences and what are bad inferences. So by that, what we mean is an inference is the act of moving from some sort of premise or reason or assumption or information or observation or evidence to some sort of conclusion or result or new information. Right? You see something happen, and based on what you see, you think, oh, well, then that means this must be the case. Right? You see, like if you see a train coming and then you see a car driving over those tracks, you infer, oh, wait, there might be trouble, right? You start with this information about the two observations you've seen, and you come to this new conclusion that they might hit each other or something like that. Or you see, all right, your neighbor's car is still in the driveway, so you infer they didn't drive to work today. You smell something coming from downstairs, so you infer that somebody's cooking something, right? So we do this all the time in our daily life, right? We make inferences, we see things, we hear things, we smell things, and based on that, we make conclusions, right? And sometimes based on those conclusions we make, and maybe some other things we have, we make further conclusions, right? And so a lot of our lives are caught up in making inferences and moving from some sort of information to more information. And the idea is logic is just the study of doing that well and doing that poorly. So inferences aren't just important for our daily life, right? Like trying to figure out, hey, is this restaurant open? Or hey, is this a good product to buy, right? And trying to find information to justify whatever belief. We also use this in science, in philosophy, and in mathematics, right? The idea is if a biologist wants to figure out if a certain population is going to survive, and based on whatever changes they're seeing, right? They make observations, and then they try to use those observations and their information and their theories to justify some other conclusion, right? About what to expect from that population. Right? Same thing for a physicist or a geologist or whoever, right? They take observations, they watch how stars move or how things bump into each other, right? They look at the sediment layering of rocks, and they try to make conclusions based on this, right? What's the right view to hold about how things work together based on the observations and the evidence we've been provided? So logic is, generally speaking, the study of good inferences for all of these things. For daily life inferences, right, just coming from, hey, somebody said something, should I believe them, to just scientific inferences, right? Well, I have this much data, right? What does that tell me about the world, right? Can I justify this claim or that claim? Logic is about all of it. Okay, so in order to do logic, right, in order to figure out whether or not we're inferring things properly or improperly, right, because we can do it poorly or we could do it well, and we'll look at that more in just a second, we're going to try to articulate our inferences in terms of arguments. And by argument here, I definitely don't mean just simply, right, the common sense or like casual, informal notion of argument. I'm not talking about people shouting at each other until they're blue in the face and too exhausted to talk to each other anymore, and they just say, fine, you're right. What I'm talking about is something very specific. An argument for us is just a list of statements where the last is the conclusion, the thing we're trying to support, and all the rest of them are going to be the premises. So let me grab one and pull it up. Right, so the idea is Socrates is mortal here is going to be one of my premises, one of my reasons. I'm trying to justify to you why I believe Socrates is a man is going to be one of my premises, one of my reasons. Another one of my reasons is going to be all men are mortal. And based on these, I'm trying to justify this claim that Socrates himself is immortal. Right? So you can think about this as just like, right, whether this is how I'm trying to convince myself, maybe it's me trying to convince you, but I'm just trying to justify this idea that Socrates is mortal. And the idea is, in this case, I'm trying to point to two different beliefs I have. One has nothing to do about mortality. It's just that Socrates is a man. The other has nothing to do with Socrates at all. It's just something about all men and the fact that all men are mortal. And based on these two reasons, I get this new piece of information. Or I get this thing that wasn't clear to me based on any one premise alone. Right? Socrates is a man doesn't tell me if he's mortal. All men are mortal doesn't tell me anything about Socrates. But once I have both of these premises, right, it follows that, well, Socrates would have to be immortal. The only way Socrates is not immortal is if, well, he's not a man, or not all men are mortal. But right, so the idea here is this is just our way. This is one way in which we might try to justify why we should believe that Socrates is immortal. Right? If somebody asks you, hey, why do you think Socrates is immortal? You might say, well, it's because I think he's a man and because I think all men are mortal. Right? That's one way to try to justify our conclusion. And so in other examples, right, the things up here might be like some sort of scientific evidence, and then the conclusion is the theory you're trying to justify with your scientific evidence. Or you might, right, if you're thinking about a crime or something, you might have a lot of different observations or eyewitness testimony as your premises. And then the conclusion is, and therefore this person is innocent, right? Or therefore this person is not guilty or what have you. Right? But the idea is we're trying to separate what are our reasons for belief from the belief itself. And to be clear, for each one of these, we could also ask, okay, so what's your argument for premise one? And we could try to think about the whole process again. We could try to think, what if Socrates is a man is my conclusion, and how would I try to justify that? And we could essentially start working backwards. We'll get more into that as we go in the coming weeks. But the idea is, this is an example of an argument. Right? And in doing so, right, all we're doing is we're making an inference precise. We're just saying we're starting off with these two pieces of information, and based on those, we're trying to justify this last claim. Okay, so that's what an argument is. So now the idea in logic is that we're trying to distinguish good arguments from bad arguments. So in particular, let's look at this one right here. Right? A Greek person was mean to me one time, therefore Socrates was mean. Right? Again, this is a perfectly legitimate argument because I'm trying to convince you. It's legitimate because when I say legitimate, I just mean it like grammatically makes sense. Right? Just like this is a legitimate sentence, even if it's completely false. Personally, I never had a random Greek person be mean to me. It's still a legitimate, grammatically correct sentence. Just like this argument is still a legitimate, like, grammatically correct argument. You're saying, I want you to believe Socrates was mean, and here's my justification for it. A Greek person was mean to me one time. But, and this is the sort of thing we're going to spend the rest of the semester trying to really build our skills to see, but maybe you can see intuitively, this is not a good inference. Right? You should not believe that Socrates was mean just because a Greek person was mean to you one time. That is not a good justification for you to come to that conclusion. On the left-hand side, that is a good justification. Right? Socrates being a man and all men being mortal does entail that Socrates is a mortal. Right? So this is the sort of thing we're going to be interested in doing. So let me bring these labels up here. Right? One of these inferences, one of these arguments, is a good argument, right? The premises really do support that conclusion, right? And it's not just, and we'll touch on this as we go, right? This isn't just because it makes me feel good or something, or I like it, and this one just seems mean or something, or rude. Like, there's really something substantive to this argument that's missing over here, right? there's something about this argument that, like, yeah, if I believe those premises, I'd be foolish not to believe that conclusion. But over here, I might completely believe that premise, but just not think that the conclusion follows. Right? There's nothing about the premise that leads me to that conclusion. It's a non sequitur, right? So, which is just Latin for it doesn't follow, right? You may have heard that phrase from time to time. So this is generally the idea of logic, is we're going to be trying to separate good inferences from bad inferences. And right here, you might be thinking, well, this is obvious. Like, this is pretty easy. This is going to be nice and intuitive. And these arguments should be intuitive, right? Just like with most things, we're going to start with nice, clear, intuitive examples so that way we can just learn the definitions. But as we go, we're going to start seeing a lot of arguments that are simply not intuitive, that are going to be really confusing or right, counterintuitive or in some way just difficult. And what we need to do is we need to build a set of strategies, a set of tools that are actually rigorous, that are formal, that we can not just, right, waving our hands or just like throwing out, right, like ambiguous terminology, like this one makes sense, or this one looks good, or this one is obviously right. We don't want to do any of that here. What we want to do is be able to very cleanly say, because of X, Y, and Z, this one is good, and because of right, WRS, this one is bad. So we want to be very precise. At this point, we don't have that precision. All I'm saying is, hey, look at this. This should make you happy. This one shouldn't make you happy. And we're going to be, over the course of the semester, trying to really build the tools for seeing why should this one make you happy and that one not make you happy. Okay, just a couple last things now on making sure we understand what's going on with these arguments. So first off, each premise and conclusion should be complete statements. So notice, like, premise 1 here is not just like Socrates and then is a man is separate, right? Like, because now I don't know if I accept or I reject premise 1, right? It's supposed to be a specific claim that has already been justified or right, or could be justified potentially, right? Maybe I haven't justified it yet, or again, we'll talk about that as we go. But the idea is each one of these lines should be a complete sentence on their own. You don't want to just say a Greek person is premise 1 and then was mean to me one time was premise 2, because each of those are just their own things that are either true or false. It doesn't make sense to say premise 1 here is false or that it's true, because it's just an object, or it's just a thing. It's just a Greek person. What does it mean to say that's true or that's false? Similarly with 2 down here, I can't just say, yes, I agree, was mean to me one time. That's true. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Who was mean to you one time? Right? In order for that premise to make sense, it needs to be just a single statement. You're saying a Greek person was mean to me one time. That's something I could say, yep, that either happened or it didn't happen. But just having just a noun or a verb or whatever, that's not enough for a premise or for a conclusion, right? You can't just say, therefore, Socrates, or therefore, mean, right? Like, that just doesn't make sense. The idea is we're trying to say, because these things are true, because the premises are true, because I really did see my neighbor's car in their garage or in their driveway, then I believe this conclusion is really true. Okay, so that's important. Remember that premises and conclusions have to be complete statements or sentences. They need to be able to be true or false, right? Just like, we can have completely so this goes back to what I was saying before. Whether or not a sentence is grammatically correct, right? We can have a grammatically correct sentence that's still completely false, just like we can have a legitimately formed argument that's still bad. Okay, we want to be able to articulate good and bad things in our language. Okay, an argument can have any whole number of premises. So here's an argument with 2 premises. Here are 2 things that work together to justify this conclusion. In this argument, it was just 1 premise that was supposed to justify the conclusion. I could also have an argument with 18 premises. I can have an argument with 3, 7, 44, right? It doesn't matter. So long as, right, I have just, right, any whole number of premises works. I could even have an argument with no premises at all. Now, that gets us a little bit deeper, and we'll be talking about that, right, potentially later on in the semester, but that gets us into some mathematics and things like that. Okay. But the idea is, right, we can sometimes later, sometimes people will see this sort of thing and just think, oh, arguments always only have two premises. And that's not right. Arguments can have any whole number of premises. By whole number, right, I'm ruling out negative numbers and decimals and that sort of thing. You can't have a negative one premise. Okay. Arguments, just like statements, might not always be right. So I was mentioning this just a little bit ago, right? Here's a statement. A Greek person was mean to me one time. That is a perfectly legitimate premise. It's a perfectly legitimate sentence. Like it makes sense. You know what I'm saying to you. It's also false. It's just a false thing. So this can be kind of tricky for some people to get used to early on. It's important for a language to be able to write down false things, right? That's just a thing, right? So this being a grammatically correct sentence doesn't mean we think it's a true sentence. Similarly, this being a grammatically correct argument doesn't mean it's a good argument, right? So just because we can formulate something as an argument doesn't mean it's good, much the contrary. The idea is we want to formulate all of our inferences, good or bad, as arguments, and then we're going to try to, once we have them as arguments, we're going to try to figure out which ones are bad and which ones are good. Okay. This is, again, just something people can slip up on early on. They can try to think, they start to think, wait, but this is false, or this doesn't make sense. And sometimes we need to be able to write things that don't make sense in order to tell the difference between those and that which does make sense. Okay, so to sum up all of this, the idea is that in logic, what we're trying to do is we're trying to just understand this relationship between our reasons for a belief and the belief itself. Right? What are our assumptions, premises, observations, and how do those justify some sort of conclusion? And so all that we want to get all that we want to be clear on right now is just these 5 core terms: logic, inference, argument, and then conclusion and premises, right? And that's just the basic anatomy of what we're going to be looking at with logic. All right. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and take care out there.